So today we are going over from first action to loyal customer. This is using lead generation and product marketing to engage your users. I'm joined by Kirsty from Chameleon, who I'll let go ahead and introduce herself to all of you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kirsty, and I'm the head of marketing over here at Chameleon. So we're a product success tool, which you can use to make your onboarding delightful. I've been working in the SaaS industry for about over 4 years now, and I'm really excited to share some of the findings that both Unstack and Chameleon have today.
Perfect. I loved that intro of like making onboarding a little bit more delightful. My name is Chris Cardone. I lead customer success over here at Unstack. We're a modern marketing platform. So whether you need to host your website pages, your landing pages, or your blog, we have it all. I've been in the SaaS market for just about the last few years, and most recently have joined up Unstack kind of from our fruition to now. So it's been a lovely journey. And a lot of my work has to do with onboarding, which is why I also love teaming up with Kirsty, because you just have so much to bring to the table about onboarding. And it's kind of nice to hear the things that we made mistakes on, but will now improve from what we're going to learn with this webinar.
Oh, I'm so excited to share and dive into this with you.
Absolutely. So today we're going to talk about leveraging content, engaging your actual users and your customers through tours. And then we're also going to talk about learning about your customer, which I think is a really exciting piece of this. I think everybody tries to move so quickly forward in just onboarding, and there is not this major focus at first on actually learning about the customer or doing surveying in product, which I think Kirsty has some amazing stats on. But to kick us off, I'll talk first about like what content to actually leverage. I think that this is a huge piece that makes content a lot more methodical. Is every customer is in different stages. And engaging with a customer at every single stage is critical, but you also have to think about how to engage with them and what to give them in that engagement series. So we identified this and kind of broke this out into 3 overly simplified phases. That's discovery and awareness phase, trial phase, and then customer phase. There are a lot more segmentation here, but in the broad sense, what we suggest for discovery is those blogs, podcasts, webinars. This is kind of like this very brief interest intent phase where they heard of your brand, they're interested in what you're doing, but they're not yet invested in the product or they haven't really signed up for the product. Then you have trial phase. So this is kind of an earlier interest intent too, where they've jumped on, they're intrigued enough to put in their email and their information, which in marketing we always consider a huge success. So you're going to want to give them those customer stories, reinforce that you're a valuable product, give that value display. So showing the features you have, kind of the powerhouse that your product is. And then lastly, you're going to want to enforce that value display by showing them how-tos of how to use those features. And then we have the customer phase. So you won the person over, you got their credit card in your app, and that's a huge success. Now they're going to want to do some more advanced things. So this is where we give them that documentation. So really deep, in-depth documentation that explores how the product works. Training webinars, if you have a larger product, training webinars are really helpful, especially for basic users to getting them all the way to advanced. Product announcements, keep them engaged so that you're a growing product. And then more and more webinars. For ourselves here at Unstack, we did a little bit of a charting for this, and we actually found that webinars appear with really high engagement in first the discovery phase. And then weirdly enough, they pop right back up in the customer phase, which I think is a lovely little circle about for those. So that's kind of the breakdown of all of this, of where we place that content. But moving forward, we do have a really great piece on where to invest, right? We talked about a lot of content there, but as we all know, we're all small teams to kick off. So there's a lot of content to produce, but where you actually invest in it. In our state of startup marketing in 2021 that Unstack is releasing in just a couple of weeks, we found that 50% of businesses we surveyed indicated that capturing more leads is their current largest challenge. So we're going to talk quickly about what content to actually invest in and where that content can go and kind of when to make that decision to move forward with it. So first we have SEO content. SEO content is something that we really favor here at Unstack, mostly because it does 2 things. So it's not only attracting net new visitors from SERP and search engine and all of that, but it's also creating content that can be leveraged for both a current prospect, so somebody who's just discovering your brand, and a customer engagement. So you can give this to somebody who's already engaged with you, and you can also serve this up to somebody who's just searching around the net for some answers. Podcasts are not so much a short-term payoff, but more focused on brand equity and loyal engagement, right? You're not going to begin this podcast with this brand you've never heard of, unless maybe you really love podcasts and that's something that is what you're interested in. But it more works for really keeping loyal customers, right? Building that brand equity and really showing that you have kind of authority in your area. And then webinars are a really great method for lead re-engagement. So if somebody's gone cold in your CRM, lead nurture. So if somebody's net new to your sign up, this is a really great time to serve them up a webinar, show that they're still interested. And even current customers, as we went over in the last one, they kind of pop back up when we bring up webinars as they kind of express interest in that. But Kirsty, I do have a question for you as you lead content at Chameleon of there's a lot to invest in here. How did you guys kind of lean into content and how did you make that decision of where to do so?
Yeah, for us, SEO content marketing was one of the first channels that we started exploring for really top of the funnel. Now, it can seem difficult to get started with writing, but what I like to say is that everyone can write. You just need to get going with it and find what your users are searching for on the internet. Now, if you can find their intent, then you're going to be where your competitors are, and you're going to be one of the first people that they keep seeing when they're searching for terms. And then we have podcasts and webinars. Now, these can seem a little bit more intimidating. There's a lot more effort that you need to put into them. And I'm not saying that you need to start a podcast tomorrow, like that would be a big job. But what you can do is you can look for podcasts in your industry and you can try and be a guest on them. You can share your expertise and get your brand out that way too. Likewise, with webinars, you can find friends and partners in your industry and you can partner up with them and do a webinar together, kind of like what we're doing now.
That's awesome. I love that kind of like stepping stone of you don't necessarily have to build the house yourself.
Yeah.
You can kind of begin by leaning in and using channels that are already existing. I mean, we experience this here at Unstack. We have our own podcast, Zero to a Million, to quickly plug it. But we're always looking for guests. So if you have something to say, if you want to build out your authority in the entire domain you're working in, it's really helpful to kind of lean on those as a crutch. And I think that it also introduces you to the experience of what it's like to really run that show. But moving forward, we do have where to invest just a little bit more. I wanted to give this context because I think every content marketer, Kirsty included, I'm pretty sure, is a huge fan of repurposing content as much as possible. Like we talk about this like an investment because realistically content, I think any marketer can agree, content is a huge investment. We see it internally here at Unstack and in a lot of other companies that we work with of you put a lot into this, how do you get a lot out of it? And I love this quote from John from DataBox of one of the pillars to getting a lot done as a small team is embracing the practice of transpostable content. So this means turning a podcast into a blog post, a video into a podcast, or studies into 5 blog posts. It makes it really easy to do one large investment and then get a lot out of it rather than all these small investments. And I think this kind of goes to like that quality over quantity of invest a large amount once and then try and reuse it and repurpose it. And this will also help you in different facets. But without further ado, we'll also talk about the customer lifecycle and kind of what we're looking at here. I think that this was a really interesting thing we pulled from Unstack's internal metrics of over 17,000 data points. What we found here is that in the first day, 95% of people who came to our website, in the first day, those who filled out a form filled out that form in the first day of coming to our website. 99% of them in the first week, and then virtually 100 in the first month. So what this told us is we had to get content in front of people really fast, and we had to give them that value add. So this really showed us nobody's really coming back to the site multiple times to look for content that they want. They kind of find it quickly, and if they find value from it, they fill out a form to get to it. And we'll talk about gating content in a second and how to get these captures, because I know Kirsty has some really great input there. But this just goes to show that people are really interested in good content. And I think that this also speaks to us of if somebody has enough trust or even sees a little bit of value in something, they don't take days to make that decision. It can really have fast interaction and almost fast validation that you're moving in the right direction. Now we'll talk about how to leverage content, which I think is really big for a lot of brands of how do you actually get this content in front of people, How do you basically make this content actually have that return on your investment? First thing that our team here at Unstack does an amazing job at is keeping active on social. You kind of have your own community. Hopefully you're building a whole community around your brand. So keeping active on social and really pushing that content out there and showing that you're producing it, but also kind of showing your thought leadership in different areas is really helpful. Providing that content to your customers. We get huge engagement when we do those lead nurtures by actually providing them content that's not specific to the app, but specific to just education in the space. So providing content like content downloads. So this could be PDFs, articles, podcasts, and webinars like this one. And then lastly, for those who are at like that top of the funnel phase, creating those offers. So providing strategic offers for prospects, subscribers, and people on trials is a great way to continue their journey to purchase, customer loyalty, and if they're at the top of the funnel, just a simple trial beginning. Using landing pages and content downloads is really helpful for this, but we talked really briefly about gating previously. And Kirsty, I'm curious on your input here of how have you gone about balancing gating when it comes to the balance of providing value versus causing a little bit of annoyance because it's behind that door?
Yeah, definitely. It's a tough one that comes up over and over again in the world of content. So, what I would say is never gate the blog. I think your blog should be there for people to discover your content. And like what you were saying, Chris, if you have great content, people love that. People want to receive that in their inbox. So I think the barrier there is very low for them to fill out the form. Now, when it comes to gating, what I like to do here is give people a little teaser of what's going to come. Perhaps if you have a big report coming out and you've put hours into it, and this is really juicy content, you could put a blog together. You could put a blog that has some of the most interesting facts there that people can take away. They get a little taste and they're going to come back for the full report.
That's awesome. I love that. It's almost like you can provide them the foundation, but you can't build a house for free. So if you want the rest of it, you have to kind of show us you're interested. I love that because also what I'm hearing the main focus there is let's provide this value up front so that they want to kind of give us something in exchange, right? I feel like email has become like this virtual currency for us of giving your email, at least for marketers, giving your email is like our Bitcoin. So I love that, of giving them that value before asking for something in exchange. Now let's talk about landing pages. This is an amazing stat that we looked at. We just talked about gating. And I love this stat because it tells us that 70% of businesses are using landing pages. So if 70% of the market's doing something, it's obviously working. We'd hope. So 70% is using landing pages. And what we actually found here at Unstack is that for those who are on the Unstack platform, utilizing an A/B test, it actually rises their conversions by about 50%. But to go back to the original topic, landing pages are obviously a really great way to convert your prospects, to convert net new, to convert just those who are in that sequence. So it's definitely something really great to leverage when you're trying to give that content out, is leveraging a landing page, leveraging something that will get that information, but also using landing page as a door, right? We talked about this of like providing value when they fill out that email. So whether it's signing them up for a newsletter or giving them that content. So provide it as once they do that, give them something in exchange. Now let's talk about channels. I talked about being active on social media, but I think that this reinforces it in a lot better of a light of being more strategic about the channels you're using. So what we do here and what a lot of companies do that's a best practice is monitoring where certain types of content are getting that engagement. So this is looking at testing if blogs perform best on email or if they perform best on Twitter, if podcasts perform best on email or Twitter, and et cetera, and et cetera. And then once you find that really great piece of content that pairs perfectly with a channel, focusing it there. But this doesn't mean shutting off the other types of content. This just means recognizing that if blogs perform incredible over email, then let's give most of those blogs to email, and then maybe we can sprinkle webinars into that email, but let's focus on giving them the value that that channel is kind of expressing that they want. Then we'll talk about internal linking. This is the way to just continue to push people through your blog. This is a really fun way, and both of our blogs do this. Kirsty, Kaylee on our team does it for us, is every time you produce new content, looking into your older content where you can link that new content. It's kind of like, I like to look at this like introducing a friend. So you have this whole group of friends that is your pre-existing content, and you're bringing in a new piece of content. So kind of helping push that new content through by linking to it where it's relevant in other articles. So if you have a new benchmark, maybe link to it when you're talking about stats that come from the benchmark and other blog posts, and kind of letting people just explore your blog by finding relevant pieces to the one they're already reading. Awesome. So Kirsty,
Yeah.
marketing did its job. We got somebody to actually sign up for the app. And in my opinion, that's where the fun begins, especially you're in customer success. So how do we get them to engage with us?
Yeah, well, we want to get them on the path to the aha moment. So the aha moment is that moment when your user is going to realize, yes, this tool can get a job done for me. It's going to make my life easier. I want to dig deeper into this product and see what I can get out of it. And I think this is really interesting to share that improvements in a user's first 5 minutes can drive a 50% increase in their lifetime value. So onboarding is not one to be forgotten once you've got their email. Now here I've given a little example that I love. We have Trello, an old friend for all of us. And what they do here in their onboarding, when you sign up, straight away you're put into the product and you're met with a Trello board. Now, on this Trello board, they're going to tell you how to use Trello by using their very own product. They give you a list of things to do that are going to help you learn how to use their product and succeed. So straight away, I'd say within the 5 minutes, I've reached that aha moment.
Awesome. Well, I love to see that like this app that I think we all had to take on for work from home.
Of
Um,
course.
but using Trello as kind of an example, how do you find the right moment to deliver that messaging in the engagement trail? Like did you discover when it's best to kind of pop up and give them that really good sequence to move them forward?
Yeah. So one thing I like to come back to when we're talking about user onboarding is this model, the BJ Fogg model. Now, this is all about using the right prompts at the right time, because when and where your messaging appears is going to impact a user's motivation hugely. Now, if we look on the bottom here, we've got the interface. Now, this is largely your designer's job to see how they design your product using user feedback to make that even better. But as marketers and product marketers, we have to really focus on the value proposition here. Now, what are we offering people and how is that going to impact their motivation? Now, if we've got a strong value proposition, those prompts, that messaging, we've got a higher chance of succeeding with that. However, if we're coming in way too strong, if we're bombarding them with offers when they've just got into your product, those prompts, they're not so likely to succeed. So how can we make sure we're getting people in the door and getting them excited about our product? Well, we have to roll out the red carpet. We need to be there to welcome users at the door. And my favorite way to do that is in-app with a product tour. So I've put a little example of a product tour here, which is from one of our customers, the Motley Fool. When you enter their platform, if there weren't a tour there, it might be a little bit overwhelming. We're looking at loads of stock options and you could be a little bit scared off there. However, they've put a welcome tour here and they've got their founders there, they're smiling, they're giving you a welcome and you're ready to start and learn. Now, we found when we were looking into our end user data that a 3-step product tour has a 66% completion rate. Now, that's amazing, that rate, when you compare it to an email open rate. Imagine at 20, 25%. People are going to click into the email, but are they actually going to go through and then go into your product to learn even more? These tours are really contextual. The prompt lands when your customer is actually in the product. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be using email or social or all the other channels that we have available to us, but we should be taking the prompts and running with them at the right time and having a complete omni-channel messaging strategy in place. Now, more on those completion rates that we found. So like I said, a 3-step tour has a 66% completion rate. Now, I'd say The shorter the tour, the better here, because in our findings, we found that a 3-step tour is 38% more likely to be completed than a 6-step tour. And what we see is that a lot of people put out really long tours, when really we should be looking at taking this long tour with everything that you could ever do with a product and breaking it up into smaller tours. How can we deliver snippets of advice that people are they're gonna take, and they're gonna learn your product bit by bit? They're gonna enjoy the learning experience too. And the great thing here is that you can trigger the tours based upon the actions that your users are taking. Perhaps they're hovering around a feature, you see they're interacting with it. There you can pop up. You can show them a tour or even a checklist, which can lead to help center documents and encourage them to learn even more.
I love that. At first, we actually did a really long tour on onboarding for our page editor. And the biggest learning that we got from that is kind of exactly what this echoes, is nobody wants to be forced to learn. And there's also not just one way to learn. I think that that's something huge we discovered here, that this once more echoes, is there are so many different learning habits. Like there are people who will love that like 20-step tour that shows them everything because they just want to be handheld. But a lot of us, especially today, don't have time to kind of sit through that, right? We signed up for a tool and we just want to go do one specific thing we know it does, and then we want to bounce away. And that's not bad, but then we can kind of save those rest of those features to be explored down the whole product pathway. I like to see this as like, you don't have just one moment to engage your user. You can kind of sprinkle it, like you said, you can sprinkle it over the course of a week or two of them being in your app, and you don't necessarily have to do everything in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. And like what I said about the aha moment, there might not be one aha moment. You could have a few along the whole customer journey. So by enabling these tours, you can really get people excited and wanting to, like I said, dive deeper and learn more. Now, want to up those completion rates that I talked about? Well, media is an excellent way to do that. Now, diving back into our benchmark report again, we found that the average tour is 89 seconds. That's how long a user is going to stay engaged and be interacting with that tour. But when you add media to the mix, you're going to see a 9% increase in that time spent on your tour. And to go even further with the completion rates, if you want to keep up in them more and more, tours that had media embedded in them, like a video or a loom, they had a completion rate of 92%, which is such a great statistic to share with you. Now, I put one of my favorite examples here from our friends over at Mixpanel. They embedded a loom video into their onboarding tour. And what I love here is if you look into it, you can see there's little emojis all the way through, and that's giving me great social proof. I've got so much motivation to watch this video. And also, in a time where we want to get things done quickly, straight away, I'm shown that this is going to take me 2 minutes to watch. I've got that time and I'm ready to learn.
I love that, giving them exactly like how long of an investment that piece of media is. I feel like there's such that loop of like some companies will do it where it's 30 seconds and then some will do it where it's like a 50-minute thing. But also pro tip, I guess, is using that loom. I love the emojis that like show even nearing the end, people are still loving it, kind of pushes you to continue to move forward instead of jumping out.
Yeah, definitely. And when you're trying to learn a new feature, sometimes it's easier to watch and learn rather than read through a big article. Now, moving on, you've got your users in the product, they're using it. What next? Well, you need to keep listening to your users throughout the customer journey. And this is really key to getting loyal customers at the end of the day. Now, what can you do with the feedback? Well, you can use it to shape your product roadmap. You can find out what your users are loving when it comes to content. And then all this feedback that you're gathering, you can bring it right back to the beginning of the customer journey too. And that's going to resonate with the people who are just finding your product and hopefully get more customers through the journey. Now, I really want to highlight a few different ways that you can collect feedback in the customer journey. Now, email has been a really traditional channel for sending out a quick survey. Hey, do you have 3 minutes to fill this in? When I get these, I'd say I don't complete many of them. And I've got one from NordVPN here as an example. They're asking for feedback, but if I'm not actively using their tool, I probably won't do it. Now, I found another one, which I think is much better, from Demio. Now, they've sent me a newsletter that I've already subscribed to. I love receiving it. And they're asking for my feedback about the newsletter in the newsletter. So here, yeah, I'm much more likely to give them the feedback on how they're doing, because I want that newsletter to be more catered to my interests, and I want to keep reading this brilliant content.
I love that. Even though we're like the ones sending it, like the dirty secret is a lot of us don't fill it out, even though we're the same people sending it and hoping that others will fill it out. Um, but I also love one piece of that is that a lot of these aren't long form. I feel like a lot of us think that the only way we can get feedback is by sending like a 20 question survey. And I think that at some points, there's a lot of things where we only need micro responses. Kirsty, I think you actually have something specific to those micro responses where that's actually best to leverage in a lot of these cases.
Indeed, I do. Straight on to my next point there, Chris. So, what I think is the best way to collect feedback from your users is when they're actually in your product. Now, you can do that with a micro survey, which is a type of user survey with 3 characteristics that we can look at. They're micro, they have one question, and you can also allow space for comments or feedback. And people are pretty receptive to giving that feedback, which I'll touch upon later too. And these surveys, these micro surveys, they're real time and they're triggered by specific user actions. So if you see that someone is looking around your pricing settings, you can ask them a question about how they're finding it. If you see that they're on a certain feature, you can ask for a customer effort score, see how difficult or how easy they're finding that feature too. And like I said previously, they're context specific. People are actually using your product. So this is where you're going to get the best feedback, as people are engaged, and I find they're happier to give that feedback too. Now here I've got a couple of examples of micro surveys that you can run in your product. You could ask them about what do they love the most. You can find that feature and then you can feed that back to your marketing team, as they're going to want to know that information, like the real users that you already have. What do they like? And then they can put that back to the start of the funnel again. And like what I said with the Demio newsletter, asking about what kind of content you want to see, you could do that in product too. You might find that you've been putting out loads of long form content, but your users, they actually want a video tutorial. So that's a really great opportunity to get that feedback on your content.
That's awesome. And I love what you're about to jump into here. But realistically, I mean, those questions were amazing of like what content are people actually latching on to. And even though sometimes long form reports are really great, we look at graphs like this where there's so much higher completion when it's just one question. And I think this can even like talk to ourselves using apps, of especially today where everybody's so busy. It's so much easier when you kind of have that assurance of, hey, can we only just ask you one question? And you can literally click it in an app. We're not even going to open it in a new window. So I think that's amazing because it also reframes us to force ourselves to really think about what questions truly matter, rather than having the comfort of like these 6-step surveys that only about 5% of our audience actually complete in their life cycle.
Yeah, I mean, one click, very low effort. People are very keen to give that information to you and share. Now, when we actually dived into what types of microsurvey perform the best with our end user data, which is in our benchmark report, I'll drop a link to that later, we found that the 4-option microsurvey performed the best. And that had a 92% completion rate, which is just a brilliant figure to be thinking about when you're wanting to collect more feedback. Now, we saw more traditional micro surveys in there, like NPS and 3-option. They were there too. However, the highest performing were 4-option, 2-option, and CSAT surveys there too. And I mentioned previously that you can have the one click and you can always ask for more feedback. And people like to do that. People like to tell you what they're thinking about and what they want to see more of. Now, when we looked into how many people will repeat a micro survey, we found that 3 was the magic number here. People are happy to give up to 3 micro survey responses a month. But when you dip to that 4th micro survey, people got a little bit fed up, and that dipped to about 8% completion rate when you show them a 4th survey there.
I love this so much because as a person who loves to survey things, I mean, looking at these stats of, and you said per month, every single month you can get
Yeah.
80% of your audience to answer 2 questions from you and 55% of your audience to answer 3. So once more, it kind of forces us to ask the right questions that we actually need the answer to. But that means every single month we have kind of this incredible ability to actually understand what, in both these cases, a majority of our audience is looking for in 3 different ways.
Indeed. And I think we can bring this all together. Like we've been talking about the top of the funnel all the way through to creating loyal customers who are happy to give you feedback. So I think, Chris, you could take it back from the start again.
Absolutely. So we talked about that awareness content. We talked about those blogs, webinars like this one, podcasts, everything to bring them in. And then we have that conversion content, which is that how-to videos, those use cases, which are always lovely to be tied together, is giving them the use case and then actually how to perform that use case. We also talked about documentation, what comes later on in the funnel. And lastly, we talked about those product announcements, which I find even work for conversion content. I mean, here at Unstack, we have a lot of customers who there might be that one feature they're pretty keen on, and the second we release it, we see a ton of upgrades because that's all they were waiting for us.
Yeah, definitely. Then we bring in the in-app messaging, we swerve in there, we roll out the red carpet with a product tour, and we continue to engage with our customers. We continue to find out what they want to be seeing in terms of content in their newsletters. We collect all that feedback, and back to the top of the funnel, we're creating that awareness content again.
Amazing. So we brought it all together, which I feel like is just an incredible thing. But we also pushed a lot on you guys. So I want to give you all a way to give us questions of anything you're curious about, of anything that we covered. Feel free to drop it right into the chat. And while you guys are doing that, obviously we want you to stay in touch with us. So feel free to utilize these resources. My name is once more Chris Cardone. But realistically, if you want to learn a lot about the journey, I love Kirsty's blog, and you guys actually just put out a benchmark, which I think you're dropping a link to.
I'll pop it in now.
So feel free to check that out. That'll be right in the chat. And then also, once more, feel free to drop us any questions you might have about anything we just covered. Lovely. Kirsty, do you have any like ending remarks or like pro tips? I know your benchmark survey was huge. So was there anything, to make it in your own words, any like aha moments that you noticed that you're just like, wow, I can't believe this is something, or maybe something that was a little bit surprising?
In our benchmark report, definitely for me, I think how much media is impacting how we engage with onboarding these days. Like I said, I think we'll want to learn quickly and we want to just dive into products. We have so many tools that we're using every day, and our patience can be low. So by showing people a video, a quick explainer, and getting a 92% completion rate, that was a great stat to see.
I love that. I also feel like there's a lot there, even for myself. Anytime there's like media in an onboarding, I'm so much more attentive because I'm just like, okay, somebody will actually say it for me. But this ties really well into a question we just got of any suggestions on what content works better in which situations. And there's so much here and like so many different things that we'd have to explore to answer this. But just my personal recommendation, I in customer success here at Unstack. So anytime that I'm working with the customer, I find the pieces of content that work best are really those simplified how-tos and those use cases. I actually am a huge fan of use cases because I always find it just motivates the customer so much. Of there's like, that is something I'd actually love to do with the product, and then reinforcing that with a how-to. But Kirsty, I'd love to hear if there's any pieces of content at Chameleon that you guys have found have been really resourceful for any of those stages of that funnel that we went over.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'd like to touch upon that quote that you brought up at the beginning about when you're working in a small team, you have to think about how much content you can create from one thing. And we put out, actually, we collaborated on this, Chris. We did a CustomerCentricity blog. So I think this was a great piece of content, as the customer should be at the center of the customer journey. And by putting out a well-researched piece of content where you can incorporate video, where you can incorporate expert quotes, and when you can really educate the customer on, well, the customer on the customer there. But by creating this large piece of content, you can then go on to create a webinar. You can be a guest on a podcast. You can do your how-to videos, and you can create even more blog content out of that theme too.
I really love that, tying that back into like that large quality over quantity, because realistically, they're not mutually exclusive. Of like, we talked about this earlier, if you can invest a lot in one really quality piece. And I feel like just by doing so, it almost creates more in quantity, because it can be, as John said in this quote, is transpostable into so many different mediums.
Definitely. And I think when you're doing that too, you're going deeper into what your customers are looking for in their content. And as you create even more, you're learning even more as a marketing team too.
So we have an interesting question that I'm actually going to hand off to you, Kirsty. Is, do you ever have questions to ask if somebody's unhappy? I think that this is kind of relating more to like an NPS survey of how do you find those go? Do you usually find that there's a lot of people who are unhappy that are willing to inform you of it? Or do you kind of feel like those people are a little bit more hesitant to respond to those?
Yeah, I think the thing is with feedback, it's harder to get feedback out of perhaps a neutral customer, and it's hard to find out where they're having difficulties. They'll be a little bit more reluctant to give you that feedback. But what I'd recommend here is ensuring that you are using the microservices here. And you could use the NPS, you could use a customer effort score too. You might find out that one feature in particular users are really having a problem with. And then that's an indicator to you and your customer success and your product team that you might need to put a little bit more help out there. You might want to give them some more documentation. You might want to put out a how-to video there. And you could even create a tour out of that, preempting that people are finding it a little bit tricky.
I love that. I do love where you began that of, it's also what we see here is there are kind of two buckets of customers that want to give feedback. And this is oversimplified because others can fall outside of these, but there's extremely happy customers who want to give like so much positive motivation because they're just in love with the product. And then extremely unsatisfied customers who want to give so much feedback because their experience has been a burden. And although it's sad that we only like hear positive and negative, I do feel like a lot of the time it's really great to ask the unhappy customers what's happening, because that can usually enforce like a tour or, like you said, actually creating content around something that they got confused on. One small thing this question didn't ask for is like how to get that additional feedback. And one small tip that I actually pulled from the team at HubSpot is what they looked at is they'd actually look for how many words were given if you have an open text feedback field. And if they were over about 3 words, the person usually wanted to chat more. They just didn't want to write it out. So that's a really great time to look into that, send them off an email and be like, hey, can we connect on a Zoom call maybe, if you have somebody who is on your team available to take on that feedback. And then lastly, and I think we can wrap after this, is how do you suggest kind of getting this over to the product team? They're kind of asking like, how do you ensure that they actually leverage these responses, but how do you get it over to them so that content and, marketing and product can actually take in what's being seen in these surveys?
I would say here, over communication is definitely your friend. We're all on Slack, and if you have your micro surveys live, you can connect that to Slack and you can have a live feed of all the feedback coming through. I think when you do that, you're really going to find that your product and your marketing team, they're going to start commenting on certain responses that you're getting, and a conversation will begin from there. And like I said, when you communicate with the teams, you kind of break down any friction that could be there.
Awesome. That's amazing. One question from Ben that I think we'll wrap after is, what's the best way to promote content before you have significant SEO and a smaller user base? And Ben, I can't answer this one because I actually am fully customer success, but I will link in the chat a really great webinar from Kaylee, who's on our team, who does an incredible job with content. And she actually spoke on a lot of ways that you can leverage pre-existing content for SEO. But Kirsty, I didn't know if you had any tips on that, because I know we all start small
Indeed.
and it's a bit hard to optimize during that time.
Best way to promote content before you have significant SEO. Well, I'd say here you want to look towards your social channels once you've got your content published. But here I'd really leverage the connections that you do have in the industry. Like, who can you be talking to that can give you a great input in the article? And when you start talking to them, you're building more of a relationship and you're making the marketing a lot more human. I think there you can really work in the promotion side, as people like sharing what they're talking about, and I think that's a great idea to get your content out there. And when we see that social sharing happening, that's going to start to shift your SEO bit by bit. So as long as you're choosing the right keywords there and going after really relevant terms with great content, like I can't stress that enough, brilliant content, I think that's the best way to go about promoting it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for that insight, Kirsty, and just for joining us today.
Thank you.
This has been such incredible insights. If you guys want to get Kirsty's benchmark, I know that it's right in the chat. And Unstack's benchmark will also follow in the next coming weeks. We'll announce that by email to all of you in the follow-up to this webinar. But thank you to you, Kirsty, especially for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today to hear everything we had to chat about.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for having me. And thank you, everyone, for coming. It's been really fun.
Of course. Bye, everyone.
Bye.